you know, this represents an effort, a civic engagement effort on part of the governor to bring a lot of people to the table to think more deeply about where we need to go in public education. And he'd outlined a few markers, things that he was concerned about and cared about in terms of the future, but he said to the group, we need to do better than we're doing. The general theme of the effort has been doing well isn't good enough. And the reason we come to that conclusion is, you know, we've done quite well compared to other states, but when we look at our performance relative to other nations, when we look at the performance beneath our averages of the performance of various subgroups, we've got pernicious, persistent achievement gaps that we haven't been able to close in 15 years of reform, especially the correlation between poverty and educational achievement, which continues. And the part of the dream of education reform was we were going to eradicate that correlation. We haven't done it. And we should admit, as I said in my opening remarks yesterday, you know, the grade for education reform this far is necessary but not sufficient. And so what is really presented in this report is the governor's action agenda over the next dozen years, and laying down a vision for where we need to go in education in order to have an educational system that would work to prepare every child for success, and at the same time to prepare our society and our economy so that it has the kind of people ready to go into the workforce who have the skills and knowledge to be competitive with all the other nations who are working hard to grab the same kind of business that we're after these days. But this notion of kind of all means all, which we did articulate as part of the beginning of ed reform, and looking at the results right now and saying we're not getting them there, and what's going on here. Mm-hmm. And so I guess the analysis that's embedded in this, you know, parallels some writing I did in Commonwealth magazine recently about this situation, if you want to see it at greater length. But I mean, the general theory is we haven't done enough to build the here again the term, but to build the capacity of teachers to get all of their students to achieve the standard. I mean, heretofore it was okay if only a few got to the high standard and you had lots in the middling to mediocre level and a few failing. It was the sort of classic bell curve. Now we're saying you need to move all of them to the high end of the curve. And simply policymakers declaring that or even giving more money doesn't tell you how to do it. It's not the same as saying everybody has the same potential or everybody's going to achieve the same level of mastery, but it is to say that within the range of the normal capacity of the human brain, those things that we're asking kids to do at a proficiency standard, even if you look at MCAS at the proficiency standard just in English and math, mm-hmm. are things that it's reasonable to expect any child to be able to do if you educate them properly. So it's a floor, just like we say, you know, everybody ought to be able to speak English and communicate clearly. That's a baseline. We don't expect everybody to communicate like Shakespeare, but we expect everybody to have, you know, a basic level of communication skill.
And our current education system does not set that as a standard?
It does set it as a standard. What it doesn't, what we don't yet have, we haven't achieved the standard. In other words, we don't have all children at that level, and it's those gaps that keep us coming back and saying, okay, what more do we have to do? So we've got to get much more serious about giving teachers the training, support, guidance, curriculum, all the tools and training that they need to do what they weren't asked to do before, which is to get everybody to a, relatively speaking, high standard. Not to the maximum standard, but relatively speaking, high standard. The second piece that seems to us self-evident from the data is that where you have poor children and high concentrations of poor children, we repeatedly find that's where we have our underperforming schools. There are factors going on in children's lives which on average, and we all know of notable exceptions, but on average, seem to get in the way of the capacity of those young people to learn at high levels. And we're saying to the schools, you got 180 days, you got 6 hours a day, same treatment for each of these kids, and we want you to get them to roughly the same place in the same amount of time. And we fire the starting gun, and then when they don't, we sort of act shocked at the other end, and say to the schools, you know, you failed. And we're saying, on average, that's an unreasonable expectation, given the treatment that we're supplying. The treatment is not nearly robust enough for the outcome that we're seeking. So that if we're truly serious about this rhetoric of getting all students to a high standard, then it means providing wraparound support and assistance, purpose that our economic future, our way of life is at stake here, and the well-being of each of these children from an economic standpoint as well as the society. And it may well take more than we've ever invested in education as a whole to accomplish this set of objectives, although we don't think it's all about new spending. We think there's some ways of saving money as well as simply spending more money. But it goes, and part of the message is too that it goes beyond just schooling itself. That even if we optimize the classroom, if you don't have children who come to school ready to learn in those classrooms, you don't have the hope of achieving at the kind of high levels that we've been talking about.